Caricat by ACS Edizione. This is a game with a theme that is very dear to me, definitely interesting to me. The theme is the wars of independence of Italy, which is a series of wars that Italy, well, some of the Italian states went through at the time in order to become free, to become independent from foreign domination, and to be able to join into what is now known as unified Italy. There were three such wars. The first one didn't go very well, didn't really accomplish much. The second one is extremely important because it is what pretty much shaped Italy as we know it. At the end of the Second War of Independence, most of what we recognize as Italy nowadays was part of an independent country and a unified country. But it still took a third war to get other territories and to get even closer to Italy as we know it today, as we see it on a map. This game, Caricat, has two battles. It is a war game that has two scenarios. They're based on the same core of rules, but they are otherwise independent battles. And the two battles come from the First War and the Second War of Independence. Also, they have different flows, different counter mix. They really just feel like two games in a single package. The core system, as I said, is very linear. I'm going to talk about it in the next segment of this video. And then we'll talk a little bit about the individual scenarios that you find in here. And finally, I will share with you my assessment of this package. There are three types of units in the game: cavalry, infantry, and leaders. Cavalry units only have two values printed on them, melee and morale. Infantry units have melee, morale, and fire combat. Leaders usually have a number that indicates the range of their command. They may also have a bonus that applies in combat. Now, in this game, units are activated usually by activating their leaders. An exception is represented by cavalry units. Cavalry units are independent in this game. When you want to activate a cavalry unit, you roll 2 dice, 2d6. If you roll 6 or less for the Austrian player or 8 or less for the Italian player, you can activate that cavalry unit. So there is a little bit of room to improvise there. But the other units, the infantry units, depend on leaders, and leaders can be in one of 4 psychological postures, levels of commitment as they are called in the game. I prefer to call them orders, so it seems clearer to me. There are 4 possible orders: attack, advance, stand, and reserve. And each leader on the map is represented by a counter which is placed on one of the four possible orders, and that will affect how the leader will behave and how the leader will affect the behavior of his troops. During the game, each turn is resolved by going through each order starting from attack. That is, first resolve all of the units that are under an attack order, in this case units under the control of Vittorio Emanuele. Then you would resolve all of the units that have advance orders, then stand orders, and then reserve orders. And again, you can activate the cavalry units at any time when it is your turn to be activating a unit. And that means that you can, again, improvise. You have some room for maneuvering there, even if, say, the situation of your orders is not exactly how you want it to be. At the beginning of a turn, you also get a chance to change the level of your orders by 1, for example, from here to here, or from here to here. You roll 2d6, and you need to roll equal to or less than the number printed on the counter in order to be able to change the level of the order or the type of order of your leader. Orders, well, units that are under an attack order must move towards enemy units. They get an advantage in melee combat, but they get a penalty in fire combat. They're just running and yelling. They don't have the time or patience to aim well. Units under an advance order must try to move closer to enemy units. They can engage in combat, but there are no specific modifiers based on that. And units with a stand order, well, they tend to just stand there. They can move up to 1 hex, but they have to move towards one of the objective areas that was under control of the owning player at the beginning of the game. Reserve units, they are sitting on their butt and taking a nap. That's pretty much all that they are doing. Units are activated when their leader is activated, and units that are within the command range of their leader, that number is counted in hexes, well, those units can act to their full potential. If they are outside of the range, there are penalties that they have to suffer, and the penalties increase depending on the distance. Units that are activated can move and attack, as you probably have imagined, since this is a war game. They can move up to their full movement allowance, which is not printed on the counters, but it is of 4 movement points for infantry units, 9 for cavalry and leaders. And it is, of course, movement is affected by terrain, by the different terrain that the units move through. Units can also attack. There are 2 types of combat in this game, fire combat and melee combat. When you attack, you decide the type of combat that you want to use, but the defender will also get to use fire combat if we're talking about infantry units that do have a fire value. Cavalry units do not have that value. If the attacker uses fire combat, and that is resolved simultaneously with the defensive fire of the defender. If the attacker is using melee combat, then the defensive fire of the defender is resolved first, and then the attacking units get to resolve their melee. And the melee in fire combat are resolved in pretty different ways. For fire combat, you look at the fire value of the firing unit, and that represents the number of dice that you will roll. For example, a value of 4 represents 5 dice that will be rolled. You roll the dice, actually that number may be modified by modifiers, and then you score a hit for each number that you roll, which is equal to or higher than the morale of the opponent, of the unit that you are firing on. As for melee, the way it works is that this time both sides roll 2 dice, and they add the melee values of the units involved in combat. There are other modifiers that can be added, and then you take the, for example, here's the list of modifiers, then you take the higher total of the 2, and you subtract the lower total of the 2 from that one, and you look at the differential. And here you have a table that tells you what the results are. If both players have a final result, a total that is the same number, then they both lose a morale level. And then a small differential, the loser, that is the player with the lower number, gets 1 morale loss, which is 1x, and the higher the differential, the worse it is for the loser. Hits are absorbed in as morale losses. There are many levels of morale here. You have a unit at the ready, which is the best morale level. If the unit takes a hit, it is shaken. Well, actually, no, it is kind of like just upset, and you flip it to the other side. Then, next hit, next level of morale is shaken, with penalties to the values. Then you have broken, then you have routed, and after routed you have eliminated. And each level of morale, of course, has penalties that are applied to that unit. At the end of a turn, each unit that is not adjacent to an enemy unit will get to automatically recover a level of morale. So let's say that the point here is that combat is not just, well, you lose a number of steps. It is a very fluid situation in which you have this fluctuating system of morale that the units keep getting disorganized, demoralized, they recover, they go back into the fray, they get hit again, they get disorganized again, and so on and so forth. I like this, actually. That's a lot of nuances without burdening the system with too many rules. It just kind of makes sense overall. Oh well, these are really the main ideas. You move, you attack using fire or defensive fire. There are a couple of other rules, for example, cavalry charge that gives a bonus to cavalry, cavalry retreat. Cavalry units can try to retreat from attacks by infantry units, this kind of thing. You simply play turn after turn after all units, all leaders have been activated, or cavalry units, you may have tried to activate those, you may have been successful or not. Move to the next turn and you continue until the end of the scenario, where victory will be assessed based on elimination of enemy units and on control of key objectives on the map. This is the setup for the Battle of Montebello, first step to freedom, an early battle in the Second Italian War of Independence. The Austrians are coming, there's quite a few of them, and the Italian forces, here represented by a coalition of French and Piedmontese forces, definitely are heavily outnumbered. We have a small group here, and 2 units of cavalry there. Larger groups of infantry supported by some cavalry for the Austrians. However, the Italians have a little bit of an advantage in the fact that the Austrian leaders have a stand and reserve orders, so they're not going to do much, and they're not going to change their order too early in the game. The turn track tells you when some of these leaders can start trying to change their order, 4, 5, and 6 respectively. There's actually an Austrian leader that doesn't have his name printed on the track because he can never change his initial order unless he's attacked. And that means that the Austrian leaders are not very proactive at the beginning of the game. There's also an Italian leader that is not active at the beginning, that also has a non-active order, and it's this guy here. But then we have these other units here that are commanded by a leader that is advancing, and then we have unattached cavalry units that do not need a leader to activate. So the Austrians are going to be mainly passive at the beginning of the game. They do have cavalry units that they can activate in a more active way, but the majority of their army is going to sit there and wait to be attacked, which means that the Italians really have to try to take advantage of that if they do not want to be overwhelmed by too powerful a counterattack. I see an interesting element of the terrain here, this area which is covered in rough terrain, which is pretty hard to move through, and I imagine that the Italians will want to try to take advantage of that. It certainly would be nice to try to sandwich some Austrian forces between a line of advancing Italians and rough terrain. We had to see, of course, what are the dangers of these other leaders reacting and blocking the Italians and squeezing them within 2 lines of Austrian forces. But since these leaders are not particularly active at the beginning of the game, that may be something that the Italians will be able to avoid. In any case, this seems quite an interesting battle, definitely a small confrontation, and I'm going to play it next. I'm pretty excited about it, it looks like fun. Battle of Pastrengo, April 30th, 1848. This battle is part of the First War of Italian Independence. The Italians, here represented by Piedmontese forces, are coming from here, and from here. There's also a group of Italians which are on reserve at the beginning of the game, and it is unlikely that they will ever do much in the game. You can try to change their order and to bring them onto the map. Starting from turn 8, the game has 10 turns. That tells you that probably they won't do much. Also, they may activate if the enemies really get close to their entry X. But again, that depends on the situation. As for the Austrians, they are pretty much on the defense. One of the leaders also cannot change his order at the beginning of the game unless he's activated, whereas all of these 3 groups of Italian units start on with advance orders, so they will move and they will attack, and the Austrians will have to react to that. Interesting terrain feature, this gray line that you see here is an escarpment and that type of terrain can only be crossed by infantry, not by cavalry. Cavalry have to move by roads, so you can see that there will be a little bit of a bottleneck there. And here you have the Adige River, which can only be crossed at that pontoon there, which the Austrians can choose to blow up during the game. Why would they do that? Well, because there's a particularly profitable victory hex there, which is worth 15 victory points, which is pretty huge, and the Austrians may want to try to defend that. There are also other victory point areas around the board. You score victory points by eliminating enemy units, like all other games, like the other scenario in this game. This one also is based on control of victory area and elimination of enemy units for victory purposes. There are optional rules. For example, you can replace some of the leaders. You can have an Italian leader who is more active than the one that we have here. This Federici guy in the standard rules will simply go advance towards Pastrengo and then will sit there just following his orders very cautiously. You can have a little bit of a more independent-minded leader if you want. You can also have some extra Austrian leaders. There are just a couple of extra rules that you can use to customize the battle. As is, I think the battle is very promising. I haven't played it yet, but I definitely like the number of units that I see on the map. Definitely a low count of units. It took me probably 5 minutes to set up the game, but enough to create interesting situations. I believe the terrain definitely will present challenges, but the gameplay is definitely going to be asymmetrical. Well, enough with the wild guesses. I'm gonna play the game next. Why would I be guessing when I'm gonna play the game? And I'm definitely, well, I'm pretty excited about this battle. I definitely enjoyed playing this game. It's a good game, or I should say this is a good package of two games. The rules are definitely easy to understand. There are sometimes slightly gray areas, maybe due to the fact that the rule book looks like it wasn't written by native speakers of English. The publisher is Italian, the designer is Italian. You have the plus that you get to learn about topics that maybe would not be represented in other games. On the other hand, of course, there is a translation, I wouldn't say problem or issue, the translation step that becomes part of the product that you purchase. I didn't have any problem getting past those gray areas. The rules are so simple that definitely that wasn't a problem. For the rules themselves in general, it is a system that I like. What I like about the system, it is that it has a system that includes orders. I always like games with orders that influence the way in which different groups of the two armies act. I like especially when there is trouble or potential trouble in changing the orders. You are the commander, the ultimate supreme commander, and you send out orders which may or may not arrive on time, may or may not be misunderstood, may or may not be performed the way you want it to. And the fact that here you may have a charge, an attack which you want to stop, and attack continues because you just can't communicate with the commander of that section that they should stop charging the opponents, or you have another area of the board where you would like your forces to attack and somehow they look like they're sleeping on the battlefield. You have no idea of how you can revive them and what went wrong in the chain of command. This game has a very simple and economic system to represent all of the potential mishaps that would happen in the chain of command in a 19th century battle. I find that really here there is a nice balance between the layers that come out of the order system and the simplicity, the extreme simplicity that this order system has and shows. Combat, I like the fact that there are two possible combats and you have the big decisions there to make. Am I going to do fire, which is simultaneous, so I can inflict the damage on the opponent, or melee, in which case I have to go through the fire of the opponent before I can try to stick my bayonets in my opponent. And the two systems, it took me a while to get used to the idea of the fact that they work completely differently, but I just kept the rules before me as a player aid to have a reminder. There is also a player aid that comes with the game, and it doesn't take long before those rules become second habit. Two battles. On the plus side is two battles for the price of one game, I guess. On the other side, these two battles have a standard setup. You do not have many setups. They do have rules, especially one of them, to customize the battle, to customize the number and type of forces in play, and that will add replay value. You also have extra replay value coming from the order system. In one game somebody activates on time, in the other way, in the other game with the same scenario somebody completely misses the boat. A lot of different situations can emerge from that, but overall the situation is very specific in both battles. I do not see many options for huge variations from battle to battle. The Italians are attacking, the Austrians are defending, they come to life in a certain order. The overall script will definitely tend to present itself to a certain degree from game to game. Is that a limitation? If you can get a couple of games out of each of the battles, I think you get your money worth of the investment, especially because when it comes down to really the important thing, those two battles are enjoyable to play. The system I found to be pretty solid, the narrative of the battles to be convincing and to be interesting. So my impression of this game is positive. I got to learn more about battles that I didn't know from my studies in history, but once you have the units on the map and you try things out, it is just a completely different perspective. If I teach this class in the future, I may just as well include this game in the syllabus and have my students play it. I got to learn about this game only well into the semester, so it would be too hard for me to add it to my class now, but definitely a possibility. It is a game that complete non-gamers may be a little threatened by at the beginning. Gamers and non-war gamers will have absolutely no trouble learning and play. Of course, we're gamers also will have no trouble learning and playing the game. And I think that there is enough here to keep the war gamers entertained, especially if you're looking for a war game that you can set up with relative ease and you can definitely play in an evening. Also a game that, thanks to the order system, works fairly well as a solitaire game. So Caricat by ACS Edizioni, a good game, not earth-shattering, just because it is a pretty introductory level type of war game, but definitely enjoyable when you consider how easy it is to learn the rules and how easy it is to get into the system and the type of fun that you can have from these battles. This is still a good deal. This is still a good package. Caricat by ACS Edizioni.